Hi everyone, I'm Tia Kansara. This is Replenish Earth Live. I'm super excited today to be interviewing Mileece, who is an incredible expert on biophilic technologies and ways of sort of like positively supporting our natural world and our modern lives. And she's been doing it since 1999. I'm sure she's been doing it since she was a little girl, designing interactive, beautiful experimental environments, building custom technologies that illuminate our innate and sometimes hidden connections within the biosphere. I am super excited to be having Mileece talk about Biophilosophere, this unique sphere where there is love for life. Come and join the live forest experience. This is Mileece. Welcome, Mileece.
Hi. So good
Hello.
to be here. Thank you for having me.
I know. Woohoo! This is such an exciting opportunity for us to sort of like deep dive. I mean, this is something that, you know, just learning about your work, just learning about the kinds of environments that you've been creating has been so interesting for me. Kind of like, I'm really curious, like, how did you begin? This is, work that has been featured on Vice, Motherboard. It's been featured on BBC. Your work and much of the inspiration that you've had is inspiring many other people to sort of follow your direction of like combining technology with your relationship with the natural environment. So please, please, please tell us a little bit about your journey, your phenomenal journey.
Yeah, I mean, well, I always sort of bring it back down to having spent equal amounts of time in the city as in the countryside when I was growing up, because my parents were divorced. But the good thing about that was that my dad lived in the country and my mum lived in central London, and so I would go back and forth, and I mean, I can only imagine that that's what really taught me the difference between the two. And what happened as I was growing up was, you don't know, because you have no other reference to your life. You only know your own life at that time, and you don't have like many sort of adult type of self-introspection as to, oh, what has my life been compared to other people's life? You just think about it as how things are. But then as you get older, you realize, no, things are not like this for everybody. And people don't get to, climb apple trees and like go find fox cubs in the forest and do stuff like that on the weekend. Like that's, as much as everyone, thinks that you're traumatized by divorced parents, and I'm sure I probably am, that was one of the perks, and not everyone has those perks. So I think I mean, at the time when I lived in London, it was in Holborn Junction, which is like very central. And I mean, there was nothing at all there. It was just grey. And I remember when they built the McDonald's, and so at the time it was still leaded petrol. So the lead used to just accumulate all over the windows, and the windows would be sooty and dirty. And I remember they built the McDonald's and it was yellow, and like the whole greyscape and like kind of like waxing off the soot particulates from all the traffic, and there was this beaming yellow temple like on the street, and I was like, wow, this is it. This is like the maximum that you get in the city. And how strange, what a strange place. I started to kind of realize that there's a lot lost in the city. We lose a lot, and that made me very conscious of all the things that the nature offers you. So I think it began there. And then there were various people in my life. I moved around a lot and taught me lots of different things about sound and crystal structures and stuff like that. That's a bit more intellectual and cosmology based, sort of really broad level thinking. And I, of course, as a young person, I rebelled against it all and was like, you're all weird. And then I found myself just like them as I was growing older, and realized how lucky I was to have been around them so they could teach me that stuff. And I'm so glad that they were more effective at doing what they did than I was at scoffing them for it. So it did influence me. And then, you know, my dad was making science television programs. That was like his world. And my concern for the environment, you know, started to grow when I was around 15. It got really pretty serious. And I started to find myself like deeply depressed and very sad and like crying a lot, like learning about what was going on in the forest and just crying and being kind of in a state of shock, like as this sort of reality of reality began to become apparent to me in what it actually meant, instead of just this childhood, you know, this is what it is, inconsequential thing that the world is, until you start to look at it through those eyes. So it was staggering. It was a deeply informative time of my life, because I couldn't ignore it. I felt like I wanted to make music. I was playing piano and stuff like that, but every time I sit at the piano, I'd be like, I can't sit here and like play the piano, because there's not going to be any oxygen left, like in whatever, in my lifetime, you know. And so if I want to play the piano, I'm going to have to go and make sure there's oxygen. That's literally, I remember literally thinking that, going like, this isn't going to work. I have to go and make sure that I can breathe so I can play the piano. And that was like around when I was 15, as well as just being devastated by like the awful behavior of humans to animals. Yeah, so I became vegetarian, and I studied environmental science A-levels and economics, thinking I would put the eco back into economics. That was like my whole thing. And then that was just such an awful experience, like not what I had hoped. Oh yeah, that was not at all on the level that I was hoping it would be. Anyway, I finished that, and then I went to go and make environmental documentaries, you know, TV, like my dad did. And I studied television production, and I was like, oh my God, no one is ever going to pay me for these. Like, I'll never, ever get funded for this kind of television. Because I was like thinking of like, how do you even get people's attention on the TV? It's just like, and so to get attention, you'd have to do like crazy things no one's going to pay you for, because it's outside of like broadcast, you know, parameter, like protocol. And then so I remember just like walking around that college going like, I'm going to have to invent a new way of expressing nature, because this is just not going to work. And it's got to be one that makes it visceral. It can't just be like a screen-based thing. Like, people have to experience it like I did, and I do. And I have to basically help people feel it the way I feel it, and then they'll feel the way I feel, and then we'll stop acting like crazy whatever we are. I don't even know what we are. It's crazy humans. And we'll that's the right thing to do. So I went back to what I really loved, which was sound, and started to learn sound recording so that I could record endangered species and go around the world and record endangered species and at least archive the sounds of the world. And at that time, I had basically made the decision to do that when I saw the Secret Life of Plants documentary, which was very hard to see at the time. It wasn't really circulating. And I was just like, oh my God, you know, I'd kind of had this like idea of it, like holographic interactive plants. And then I saw that documentary and I was like, what? Like don't need holograms. Like, they are really doing that. And then that was that. And then so when I was 19, I started to learn how to code so that I could code the mouth of a plant. And I was a very like, I wasn't like super good at sort of, I think I was quite shy, which is weird to think of me as a shy person, but I think I was at that time. And I didn't really want to like work with anyone. I just kind of like work by myself. And so like computers were like a great way of doing that. I was like, oh, computers that I had hated because I thought that they were ruining nature suddenly became like interesting to me, because I thought, oh, I can use them to to make this kind of mouth for a plant. So then we became friends, and then I started coding, and then I coded firstly my first album, which was called Formations, and that was actually for my degree. And then I was trying to build the software, the hardware to be able to use the plant biodata to generate the sound. But of course, you have to learn how to design sound and build sound stuff. And so I did that first. And anyway, nobody was like, when I was 19, I'm like, can you help me build a device to talk to plants? Back in 19, whatever that was, like, I don't know, it was like in the 90s or the early 2000s. Yeah, like, I can't even remember, it was like 2000 something. Yeah, I mean, nobody was even remotely interested in that. That was like, you say that to people and people were like, oh, weird. You know, they weren't like, that's a great idea. How cool, how interesting. They'd be like, like, you need to go to see a psychotherapist. Like, it wasn't the same scene as it is now. So I did phone everyone. I phoned MIT, I phoned Max Planck, I phoned everybody and was like, help me build this device. And nobody would. Fancy that. So I ended up working with this guy, Tony, who I met through David Toop, who's a music journalist, and then some other folks from Morphogenesis, who I recorded for my sound engineering degree. And Michael Prime had been doing some stuff with plants, but anyway, somehow some weird circuitous route I met Tony, who was like a, you know, if you were like in an idyllic English field and there were like haystacks and stuff, and he popped out from behind one, you wouldn't be surprised. Like, that would be the kind of like haystack gnome you would imagine. He's such a sweet, delightful man. And anyway, so he helped me build this device, which I'd technically worked out like what I wanted to do by reading about, you know, stuff like Wheatstone bridges and things like that, which I don't use, but you know, they led it was how I learned enough to design two circuits that one of which I left behind years ago, but I used them both in the beginning. And so yeah, but then I was like, oh, this plant music is like mental, because finally I managed to do it, and then it was just like unbelievably weird to write like a program in your mind and then like turn it on, you know, and then like all this music came out and I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is insane. It was very strange. It was one of the most odd experiences when it really kind of like happened. And I thought, you know, and I'd been like, I released the album and I'd been on tour. I'd been touring with like bands like Mum and Mice Parade and stuff like that. And I thought, oh my God, this is like the worst thing, because I had built all these interactive sensors, right? I built all these interactive sensors, like playing things in air and just everything I could use as gestural interfaces to design the system that eventually would be replaced by plants, which is, so I would go and perform these, like, when I think about it, it's like absolutely stupidly complex systems. Every night I would like build it and perform it in these venues, and I was like, this is like awful. I hate this, you know. I cannot do plant music like on a stage for a performance. I hate the whole idea of it. It sounds bad. People can't interact with it. It's really about people. Anyway, I'm missing a lot of stuff, but generally the progression is that I realized that people, you know, I had to build an environment, at least sonically, for this to work, because sonically it's very beautiful and very interesting, but really mostly when it's played back on proper speakers. If you play it back on like crappy speakers, it doesn't hold itself and it doesn't do what it needs to do, which is really connect people to the plants. So that's really why I started designing these environments. I mean, I was always a bit like designy. I was always doing my studio up and spent a lot of time designing my house, but yeah, it was apparent that it was actually imperative to the work that I would build these kinds of installations. And then actually the museum that I'm going to go do the show at in a couple of weeks was the first museum I did a show in ever. And they were like, wow. Oh, Mileece, we have a little problem. This is in 2006. We have no windows for your for your plants. And I was like, okay, give me a minute. And I went to bed and I thought, okay, well, maybe we should just reverse day and night. So when people walk in, actually, it's nighttime. And then during the night, we can put on grow lights and the plants can grow with the grow lights. So I designed this huge room and I built this, like, thank God it worked. But it was like stars everywhere and they looked real. It was like, it's very strange how real they looked. So it's all black lights and stars and then the earth in the middle with the plants to kind of help people understand that, like, we're floating in the middle of space and, like, in space there's no atmosphere because there are no plants and plants make the atmosphere, and there's no sound in space because there's no atmosphere. So, like, you know, it's special, this thing. It's got an atmosphere and it's got sound and it's because of the plants, and, you know, so it's here floating in the middle of this void. And that kind of became Snifferous Eden, and I did different versions of that. And one of the issues that you have in museums and in rooms is you have corners. So every time I tried to make these immersive spaces, I was having to deal with corners, which give it away, you know, because the light doesn't flow evenly over that area, and so you know, that's where it's really the only spot you could kind of tell that it was not real. And I thought, wow, we need to fix that. And I thought, well, domes are really good for that. And then in general, then I was like, well, domes are actually really good for a load of other stuff. And at the time, you know, all along this time I'm talking about, I was working with my dad on, well, he was working on fuel cells, and I kind of got on the bandwagon after I stopped doing what I think most people do still to this day, especially like when I talk about it, probably their reaction is similar to mine, which is like, I don't really want to do that. Like, that sounds like, firstly, I don't even like the name fuel cells. Like, that sounds like you're selling gas. Like, I literally thought he was a gas man. Like, I thought he'd gone from making science programs to, like, selling gas. And I remember when I was starting my A-levels, that 15-year-old, 16-year-old me, he was like righteous, you know, environmentalist, like getting invited to people. I was walking down the street with him, and I was like, well, you're only trying to make money. And I remember he just leapt out of his skin. He stopped and just, like, leapt out of his skin, and was like, what are you talking about? And then he told me what fuel cells were. And I remember the shame. I felt like I felt so whack, you know, like, oh no, I'm like doing the nice, cute stuff. Like, he's doing the real shit. Like, that's actually what you have to do to change the world. Like, it's work and it's business and it's like real stuff. It's like adult stuff. And I was like, oh. And then so then I, you know, I obviously tried to help him. I mean, I was too young and I needed to learn things, but eventually by the time I was about 20, I started to sort of at least do the IT, which you had to do because there was lots of espionage and people trying to steal the technology, which they have successfully done. But who cares, because it's old. But, like, that was going on all the time. There was, like, oh, it was disgusting. Like, there were so many, like, vicious, vile people involved in the clean energy business, and still are. And that was also fucking eye-opening. Excuse my language. Well, don't excuse it. I don't care. Nobody should care.
Oh, by the way, we've got, you know, a session that's coming out for Corporate Underground, which is purely on swearing. So, side note over. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm an expert at swearing. If I'm an expert at anything, I blame my dad.
One of the things that I love so much about what you've been saying is this sort of, it's almost like documenting things, because by documenting them, you can kind of save them for future generations. And this reminds me of the 1977 Voyager golden record that was designed by NASA to send it out into space, with the idea that, you know, someone in space, kind of like putting a bottle in the ocean, putting this record of and 1977, can you imagine how much space was on the actual record? But it was all the sounds of nature, like a baby's first sort of like sound to humpback whale singing, and all sorts of different hellos in different languages, and this idea that someone somewhere out there will collect it, find it as a memory and as a sort of an extension. I think Jimmy Carter was saying that it was sort of like sent out into space as this almost like a flag, hey, we're here. So there's something really beautiful about what you said, to almost like to document, but to experience the documentation process for you has been really fascinating, because this has actually led to such a, as Anna says, thank you, Anna, and also as John noted, that there is sound in space, we just can't hear it. It's outside of our hearing range. And as Anna's mentioned, the sort of like the universe evokes this sort of ecstatic state, right? And that there is this sort of almost connection between what it is that we're living, the experience and the reality that we're living, and the reality either in like a metal casing. I think we mentioned it before with Ada as well, talking about these sort of like concrete areas that we're living in, boxed in structures, boxed in thinking, boxed in nature, right? Like if it doesn't come in a rectangular park shape, like we talked to Merlin about, then it's, it just isn't real. So what is real? So that reality is really fascinating, and to be able to document it, to share it, and to give people the experience of something is so profound. It's so there's an opportunity to really identify those emotions that you're feeling, and to be able to express them through your art, through your creativity.
Yeah, I mean, I only take it as far as, I don't know how far I take my own. I mean, basically, I'm just trying to facilitate people to have their own experience in nature. I'm not so much trying to document it. I mean, I'm trying to get people to experience it in real time. I mean, that's basically the focus of the projects I'm doing now. There's lots of documentation, like by people who are better at documenting than I am. I mean, when you document things well, there's a lot of strategy and a lot of very carefully crafted mechanisms to document things so that people can go and reference them. And I'm probably not one of those people, but the space thing, the SETI thing, is kind of interesting because Richard Whitehead and Alfred Whitehead, sorry, and Bertrand Russell wrote a pre-SETI paper on communicating with outer space, and well, there's no sound in space. There's vibration in space, but there isn't sound per se. That's a type of mechanical wave, or acoustic sound is a type of mechanical wave that requires a medium to travel through. And obviously, space is a vacuum, so you do absolutely have vibrations. And the SETI pre-SETI communication strategies were using radio waves and things like that to basically break down this reality, because they thought about it in such an amazing way. They thought, how would you be able to explain anything about this world, like to a completely alien race, like assuming that actually maybe their worlds are very, very different than ours. And so you'd have to, they were like, you'd have to begin by differentiating between something and nothing. So it was this binary, beginning of binary, which, I thought was like a really just amazing. So pre-phonetic instances where you build up this kind of language of reality over the most discrete elements of it that you can possibly achieve. So in their case, it was kind of like a digital wave, but pulsed in radio form. And actually, that's very much like what I do today, in so many ways. And Anna's like the new project I'm working on now with the iOracle, which is the I Ching based binary origins of binary math and binary logic from 5,000 years ago. The most ancient ethical document, all of that. So these pulsing binary instances are kind of peppered through a lot of these different thoughts of like, you know, the larger cosmology of human existence, and what it means, and how to communicate it. So it's quite interesting, actually. Like, I just want to say that I'm really sorry that Carter wasn't elected another term. I think that's where we went wrong. Sort of like stick that in there. Like, the moment we elected Reagan in this country was like the end of it. I mean, seriously, you know, like, we actually pulled solar panels off the roof of the White House. I mean, unbelievable. I had a nightmare about Reagan being elected the other day. Anyway.
I think what's really yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating for me for a number of reasons. Coming back to the journey that you've been on, and of course, there's so much that we can unpick here. Partially in the direction of where where the domes that you have been creating as experiences for people to almost experience that awe with nature purely by, you know, giving them the experience, like it give them an immersive experience. So it's a multi-sensory sort of, you know, sense that has almost been lost because we don't have to do that at desks, chairs, and walls and windows. There, you know, we almost lack the language to it. Our body lacks the feelings of it. There's, you know, if there were a specific vibration that we felt in nature, perhaps that wouldn't be, because the only thing that we have maybe in the house, if we're lucky, is, you know, a couple of, you know, indoor air quality plants to improve the landscaping indoors. So, you know, for a lot of people, maybe, you know, if they do get to come to one of your exhibitions, what is it that you would like to, almost if you were in their ear, like, what would you like them to experience as they're experiencing it?
Well, it is awe. I mean, I actually just finished the talk that I think is the reason why we've ever met. We just finished editing it, putting the animations in today. It just went up, but it discusses that. I mean, it is about awe. Like, awe is, as I say in the talk, like nature's supreme catalyst. It's so effective at I think hijacking the mind to where the things that are usually hijacking the mind, or you could say like the parasites of the mind, are like frozen out for a minute, and the mind can operate in the way that it ultimately should, which is one where the sensation of time being very tight and pressed is alleviated for a moment. Your willingness to participate and communicate and collaborate are increased. You have a sense of calm, but also a sense of excitement. So you're energized, but you're not excited. And I mean, you are, but it's just kind of like not in that sort of like way that a lot of entertainment does, where you're kind of like because it's some sort of over dramatic fight scene or something. And so you know, for me to effectuate the necessary changes that we absolutely must and are late to adopting in order to mitigate climate chaos, we need to do it from that state, because the state of panic and fear, which we should all definitely be feeling, you know, so that we're aware of where we really are. It's important to feel those things because they are there for a reason. They're just not that constructive. So when environmental organizations hammer on about austerity, or, you know, how bad things are, and they don't really offer solutions, it's kind of like, don't do this, help us stop people doing that, help us stop people doing this. And yeah, we should do all those things. I'm not saying not to, but in addition, we need to be activated in actually implementing solutions. And to do that, they're not, like I said, you know, it's work. So how do we get ourselves involved in these things that are work and risky and we're afraid of, and they're not part of the norm? Well, if you have a state of awe and you're kind of like, oh yes, well, we could do this. I mean, it's a bit better. It just helps. So I think that part of what I do is, you know, give people a moment to feel that, so that they can like reconnect with reality that's been obfuscated by technology and by civilization, moving out from the agrarian into the industrialized societies, and now into the information age and whatever's coming now. And we you know, indigenous people still have those connections because they live in them. That's the difference. They have them because they
It's
live
funny
in them.
because I know we are all indigenous to Earth, and yet some of us have continued this in indigenous sort of culture in a very, very different way. Some of us have, you know, if you connect with the sort of, and I've had chats with Anna, who's in the audience here as well, about indigenous tribes in Australia and indigenous, you know, wisdom, and how that wisdom is sort of an invitation for us to connect not only to ourselves but also the earth, and almost like this really truly magical relationship that one can have with the planet. And by
Yeah.
identifying ourselves with the planet, we're also able to, you know, tap into what is almost eternally there already. It's like you
Oh
said,
yeah.
the
Yeah.
technology that sort of like almost brings it to the fore.
Oh
It
yeah,
doesn't
I
mean
mean
that
that's
it,
the point.
you
It's to
know,
design the technology to do that. It's, you know, it's the framing of what technology is there for. We invented stuff with our like thumbs and our minds to facilitate our decision making. You know, essentially we made a decision and, oh, how can we best execute that decision? And then we started to invent tools, and those tools became what we now call technology. We did it to be able to mitigate the uncertain elements of living in the biosphere, like being able to create shelter or kill something for food. And so the idea of having our own autonomy over nature and dominance over nature began with, you know, some necessity to do that, to be able to survive. And that itself is a function of nature. So it's all perfectly natural. But there's a certain point where we have now started to, instead of using technology to better interface with ecology, we're now using ecology to interface with technology. So we're using the natural resources that we have in the earth, exploiting them to develop technology. That's just our relationship with technology. Whereas what I believe, should be doing is using technology to enhance our relationship with ecology. And that means you use ecology in a way that dictates what that technology should be. And you don't ever make anything or design anything that's outside of that principle. And that's not just cradle to cradle. That's like, when you're in your design principle, you're designing things that are already there. It's not, sometimes I see these memes for the various names that things have for the sort of circular economy, and there's always at some point where something's injected, and that point of injection, I think, is a bit of a failure in that ideology, because you're still trying to dig something out of the ground where we have like 30 trillion tons of material we've already dug out of the biosphere. Like, we have everything we need. The parameters of design that we use, you know, serve a corporate agenda. Of course, we all know that, planned obsolescence and all that kind of stuff. And they also, you know, have the backbone of that is supply and demand, and some microeconomics, but macroeconomics level stuff that all has to change, all of it. So basically, this is about doing that in a way that is exciting and fun. And then you can talk about the serious stuff, and you can demonstrate how that works, how that can create a functional economy, how these things can be implemented together, how they create a holistic system that is not based on the exclusivity of value, that is causing us to die like a cancerous parasite killing its host, which is exactly how we're behaving, and we will go out with it, just like cancer does. So, you know, that's really the overarching. I have an agenda. That is my agenda. In the big scale, in the small scale, it's so that people can feel their own connection to nature, because they already have it. You know, it's not like I'm designing anything. I'm not really an artist in that way. I don't design like a piece of art that's like, wow, look at that, it's amazing art. You know, I can't, like, the art that I do is like, if someone goes, oh, I really, yeah, man, that tree like means a lot more to me now. That's you know, the art of the facilitation of people being in touch with nature that we've lost, and now we have to use fucking gadgets. You know, everyone's excited about gadgets. You can get anyone in the room if you go, ooh, there's a new gadget, and if you put an eye in front of it, people are especially excited. So I Oracle being like, is quite fun because actually it's I Ching, so it's E Oracle, so it kind of goes together. But anyway, the point is that like people love gadgets and technology, and that's all fine, but we need to design technology to promote ecology, and I feel like it's like a carrot that you can use to bring people into these environments that they normally wouldn't be attracted to or think would be silly, or all of the kind of like sad ways that we've pigeonholed nature, dirty, I don't know, full of danger, terrible animals that live out there that will eat you. I don't know, all the kinds of things that people have that make them afraid. And yeah, we should be afraid. Nature's massive and like totally scary, but it's life, and it's what makes life. It's what makes us live. So it should be there. I mean, as far as I see it, we should have wilderness and very dense cities that go up, and everything in between. It should be wilderness, and it shouldn't even be agriculture. We should be doing vertical agriculture, and this is where the fuel cells and waste to energy systems come in integration with vertical farming and algae farms and all these kinds of things that we can do to create sustainable urban living communities that work with what we can call biophilic technologies, because we're using technologies that mimic the natural way that nature does things. So for example, like the fuel cell, it's hydrogen and oxygen. In our case, there's different kinds of fuel cells, but the ones that we make are hydrogen and oxygen. You know, well, we all know that hydrogen and oxygen naturally go together. You get water. So that's what it does. It literally just like is like, oh, I'm going to facilitate you guys coming together and having a little like love escapade. And one of you lot's going to be, you know, the bachelor getting married, and some of you are going to be the bachelors that still have to go on. Those are the electricity electrons, and the other ones are the water. So, you know, it's as simple as that. And technology, I think, should be pretty simple. The hardest thing to do in all of this is to make simple technologies. Pretty difficult, but you know, but it's possible. And I think that's where we should be going. We should just be, anyway, so all these things fit together, and that's what I feel like, yeah, if I'm going to whisper something into somebody's ear, it's actually like, hey, guess what? You really want to live in a vertical city with integrated farming, and your shit's going to become like your salad, and like the energy that you use to turn the lights on is your pee, and it's going to be great, and like not have to say that, you know, because it's a bit crude. And people don't really want to hear that, I don't think. But that's kind of, you know.
There was something really interesting that was popping into my head earlier that, you know, and I suppose this sort of relates back to Michael Jackson, and we've spoken about this before as well. This sort of like the moment that you get it's almost like a moment that something comes into your mind where it feels as if this, oh right, yeah, quick, let me write it down. It's you know, something that Elizabeth Gilbert talks about in her books, and talks about in her TED Talks, and this sort of like this process of almost like catching the poem in the wind, right? Like if it doesn't, if you're not the one who sort of like quickly catches it and brings it into being, somebody else is going to do that. So it will carry on to the next person that it sort of like not sort of taps on the shoulder and says, hey, are you going to be the one that's going to, you know, like take this down and share it? It's as if these sorts of ideas almost pop up in different people's lives, or the conscience, the conscious mind somewhere, or subconscious mind somewhere, and then get sort of brought into being. Like what I love so much about Michael Jackson, and it's a quote actually that really guided me. I'm just searching for it right now, see if I can find it, and I'll read it out. But it was the interview. It was last year sometime when Oprah was getting an award, and I think there was a speech that she'd done, and automatically on YouTube straight after the speech, there was this sort of like video of, I think 1984 or something crazy, like a really long time ago anyway, of a video that Oprah was interviewing Michael Jackson live in his home. I mean, this was like live, you know, it's such a big deal because it was like TV and stuff.
Yeah.
And he was like in his house having
Yeah.
the live session. And there was this moment where he's sitting down and he's sort of reflecting totally in flow, and he shares and he says, I believe that all art has as its ultimate goal the union between the material and the spiritual, the human and the divine. And I believe that is the very reason for the existence of art and what I do. And I find this quote, I find the way that he expressed that, I find the way, and there's another video, really fascinating video, if you can find it. It's kind of like super like 1980s or 1970s video on his actual translation of how he may, in his subconscious mind, like a dream or whatever, hear an entire song. Like he used to hear an entire song. He'd wake up, jump out of bed, lucidly, and just like quickly write it all down and be like, oh my God, like that's the music there, the lyrics, and you know, these are all the instruments, and this is how it all comes together. And the ability, right, to translate how he was experiencing something that some and most would actually just completely disregard. Like that one time when something came into your mind and it could have been, would have been, should have been, but hasn't been. And so there was, this kind of reminds me a lot about, you know, the direction that we take in life and the purpose and the vision that we follow our lives with, and where it sort of like triggers us, and how we are able to sort of translate that inspiration into action, into being, into, you know, environments or experiences for people.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really have to, I mean, I'll speak for myself, I guess. I think I really had to have that, because I find the work I do is extremely challenging and super tiring and like pretty damn exhausting, and I would not continue if it was just like my art. You know what I mean? Like, I just wouldn't. I mean, there's no way. It's just no way. I don't think I'd even started. Like, it's just like way too much. Like the what really just keeps me going is whatever the other thing is. It's the thing that I feel obliged to speak for in a way, or represent, or just like hold on to for us, or something like that. I don't know. I mean, it because the fuel cells, I mean, it's a really tiring world to be constantly seeing how we have made mistake after mistake after mistake. And on the outside of the energy business, you can see that happening. That's why we have our doors closed, because the air is so bad now, because the forests are on fire, and that's because of bad decisions in energy production, frankly. So yeah, it's very clear that there's been decision after decision that have not been good. But I've been at the table when those decisions have been made, and the alternative that we don't really know about because nobody talks about it are there, and we represent them. And the onus is on us, like, to kind of get these people to do what we think is the right thing, and arguably is the right thing. You know, you shouldn't be using stuff out of the ground that was made millions of years ago when you could use it in what you make in 4 hours. It's the same stuff. It's all hydrogen and carbon, all of it, no matter which way you get it. So, I mean, it's a ridiculous situation that we're in that, has a lot of weight to it when you get involved. And, it's really about being driven by something else. It's not a personal agenda. But I'll have to say, like, I it's exciting because I can talk about this in this wonderful platform, which is not in a box. I went to Ecuador and was in ceremony with some tribal members of a nation down in Ecuador. I don't even think they're called nations there. They're just like people, forest people. And I had the same thing. I had the same thing. You know, it was like I learned that creation is really basically art is like, it should be the co-creation of sort of divine intelligence, information, or whatever you want to call it, cosmic information, the universe, the universal energy that becomes it's a co-creative process with your individual signature of that larger energetic whatever. Basically, you know, that to be able to do that in co-creation is really where you get the best work. And if you think, and this is what I think happens to celebrities and stuff like that, if you think that you are the source of that divinity, well, you've kind of fucked it up. Like, that's not really what it is. And or similarly, if you think you're just channeling, that's also not quite right. That's what it was telling me anyway, that really where it's at is what Michael said. Said about it's a you know, it's a co-creative experience. So that's, I hold on to that because I think that was an important lesson that you know, I like to know. Thank you, trees. So anyway.
It is. It's fascinating for me because, you know, in this journey of realizing your art projects, in obviously understanding the work that you're doing, the greater vision that you have is one day, and I suppose one of the questions and you know, I've written this down as well, is, are the losses of our human failures redeemable? Are we going to get to a point where there will be a tipping point towards something positive for the environment, where, of course, at the moment it is an existential reality for ourselves, like the planet's going to continue, another you know, extinction of humanity is not going to affect the planet in the way that it's just going to, like you mentioned, are we a cancer that, you know, is trying to eat away our host? So I'm curious, you know, how do you feel? Like, do you see it in your vision that we will, I mean, and I won't answer yet, but like, you know, really just to sort of like home in on your focus and your vision, how do you feel about that sort of redeeming ourselves as humans? Do you think we'll be able to get there? Or do you think our failures have really got to a point of, you know, no end?
200 whales beached yesterday, you know, can in their eyes, can we redeem ourselves? No, they're dead. They suffered. That's that, you know. Of course, we can't redeem ourselves for the things that we've already destroyed, which is, you know, a third of the world's wildlife now in the last 50 years. So there's no redemption, you know. There's continuation. We can continue on, and we can try and make it better. But, you know, we have to face the reality. We're guilty as charged. We did it. You know, we've done these things, and they count. It matters, you know, that we did it, and we have to be accountable for that. So you can't redeem yourself. You can apologize, and you can try to do better. But I don't think, I mean, I guess it's the matter of semantics with that word. I know yesterday we were talking about it's an irredeemable journey, as like a sort of hero's journey, and I feel like you don't necessarily get the nice ending that the Joseph Campbell story archetype would have you have if this was a Star Wars story, where we would, you know, it would be like all odds against you, and like that's totally normal because that's how it is, and it seems like you'll never win, and then at the end you do. Like, that's not necessarily what's going to happen here, but it doesn't mean that you don't keep trying. It's like the people that I speak to who have become recent sort of environmental activists or whatever. I mean, whatever we're calling ourselves these days, but are kind of like, how do you keep going when you feel like, you know, it's just, and my answer is, well, when you wake up in the morning and you imagine the day you die, do you want to say to yourself, I tried, every day I tried, or do you want to say to yourself, I gave up? Because that's really the only thing that's on the table. You're not going to necessarily see the fruits of what you do in the way that you expected or want it. So you can't have that as a goal or anything that you hold on to and expect, you know. I think you just need to do it because you think it's better to do it than not to do it. And you have to leave it there because it's really a rather unknown. Now, oftentimes this conversation will go down into the idea of hope versus despair. And then in that category, I say to people, you have to generate hope. You have to generate things that generate hope. Because if we don't do any of these things, there is no hope. Look at what's going on. People are extremely organized. There's people who are doing crazy bad stuff that are incredibly organized, and they all have a singular agenda. And the sort of what they would call the libtard snowflake liberal elite, which, you know, is us, probably libtards. I'm probably a libtard snowflake as far as other people are concerned. What we do wrong is we argue about nuance all the time. We argue about nuance of this and nuance of that, and we don't act cohesively. And that is, we're in a losing game if we don't start acting cohesively. So the idea is to find out what are the fundamental tenets upon which we can build a cohesive solution-based coalition. And you know, in the talk I give, I start with, forget all of your stuff, forget your like gender, your race, your economic status, just forget all of that stuff, because this is all like human construct. The fact is we all need to breathe. Like if you do this, there's no religion, there's nothing that's going to save you. There's no Allah or Jesus or anyone that's coming. It's literally just trees and like a bunch of phytoplankton in the ocean. And that's it. That's the basis of our humanity. So if we can all just think about that and work on that basis, then we can make collective decisions that, if we always bring it down to, is that going to help everyone breathe? Hopefully, you know, we'll be on a better track. And so that's you know, where we can redeem ourselves to ourselves and the future generations, but not to the people who we've just lost to coronavirus, which is a disease caused by biodiversity loss and infringement on natural habitats and irregular treatment of other beings. Like, these are the consequences of our cancerous attitude of take and take and take. If you think literally in the body, I mean, you literally make an analogy to cancer. You have free radicals and you have antioxidants. Who are we? Are we the free radicals? Of course we are, because we're going to use stuff because we're human and we haven't sorted it out. But are we trying to become free antioxidants? Hopefully. What's the difference? Free radicals go around and take and steal electrons that they can get anywhere they want, irregardless of what it does to the molecular structure of everything else. Antioxidants will go and join in and participate to create more stable molecules. It's as simple as that. Like, if we act in accordance to the principles of sharing and collaboration, we have hope, we have redemption for certain things in the future. But in some ways, no, we cannot redeem ourselves. We need to take responsibility. We did this.
I mean, one of the things that, you know, I sort of jest on is the sort of strategy, as you say, that has been implemented throughout a lot of, you know, post-war branding exercises. Perhaps we could bring that back to Edward Bernays and his ability to sort of like use propaganda. His uncle Sigmund Freud sort of like the psychology of human behavior, mass human behavior. He did something really fascinating with I believe it was Marlboro, the company, had encouraged more women to smoke cigarettes, and of course women weren't very comfortable smoking cigarettes. So by putting a group of women on the front lines of a women's march, in pretty clothing, exactly, at the suffragettes, and then having them sort of light a cigarette, and it was almost as if the media had been called in, and it was all about, you know, light the torch of freedom was the actual image that was created and subsequently rebranded as a profile of women who are free to be taking a cigarette and to rebel, right? So it's really interesting how these narratives and stories have been used. And more recently, I believe, especially when it comes to the strategy for shifting the responsibility for litter, shifting the responsibility, and I've shared this in the actual comments, the waste that we get, right, from companies that have designed them, and the blame that, you know, where it comes to the responsibility, the blame has actually been less put on the, you know, those companies that are designing and creating that depletion technology, and more on the people who are using it, but as a byproduct. They don't know that what they're doing has an impact. So where is the kind of the larger hand the hand
Yeah.
of Adam Smith, who is sort of guiding the methods and the practices of where that responsibility lies. And I talk about this quite a bit, maybe a bit more in private, but it's about this, we're hidden behind the scenes, trying our best, to get to the age of 18, and all of a sudden you're an adult, and then all of a sudden you're expected to vote, you're expected to behave according to some level of adulthood that I don't know if there are any courses at school. I definitely didn't experience any kind of came to political science and making decisions and voting. I also don't really know much about preventative health if it hadn't have been for my parents and their Ayurvedic practices at home. So the National Health Service would triage me out, because obviously I would be eating all sorts of chemical-induced, monocropped, preserved items that I can get for £2.50 from McDonald's. And what's really fascinating to me is the sort of like the shift of responsibility from the companies that have actually created it to the people who go out just to live, right? Like shift the responsibility to them, because as far as we're concerned, it's your problem. You're the one who's done it. You naughty consumer. And so the finger's pointed towards an individual who is in a system that is designed by largely free market forces, that is nowhere near governed in the way that they can be, because they're lobbied into governance, right? So wherever a democratic process has been largely lobbied into behavior, you don't really have the freedom to make your own decisions, because those decisions have already been made for you. And a conversation that I had with a professor at London School of Economics once was, you give choice, but if that choice is confirmed choice, like, let me give you an example. The one that he used was, if you're a mother and you're taking your child out for a walk and you want your child not obviously to hurt themselves, so that you're trying to get them to wear their shoes, there are two ways that you can go about doing that. First method is to give the child the option of wearing or not wearing shoes. Hey, look, you can wear shoes, or you don't want to, don't wear them, right? But the 50% of that decision isn't good for the child, and definitely isn't good for you, because you'll have to most probably, put plasters and bandages on their feet. The other option is, and again comes into sort of like, almost like choice dynamics, is, hey child, you have the option of wearing the pink shoes or the red shoes. Pick. Both choices are within the scope of a parent being responsible over their children's feet. So there comes a point where apparently you become an adult, whether it's 18 or in the US it's 21, and you're expected to do certain things, but from the sort of the umbrella of your parental care, right, your parents sort of guiding you, it then goes into sort of like unknown territory, because the government doesn't really do that. So then you're sort of expected to have and made these sorts of decisions or these choices, but these choices may or may not be, within the sort of framework that one needs to survive, to be able to survive. So who's the parent that makes the choices in order for a child to be protected, especially if they don't know that they are the consequences to the actions that they may take? So it's really fascinating in terms of, who makes those decisions, and whose, consumer behavior is really the responsibility of whom, right? So when we come to the act, I remember Margaret Thatcher, picking up a piece of rubbish. I'm just reading it from the actual article directly. Margaret Thatcher picking up litter in St James's Park for a photo opportunity captured the tone perfectly. This is not the fault of the government, she told reporters. It is the fault of the people who knowingly and thoughtlessly throw it down. And it's fascinating because, of course, government's not going to take responsibility for the infrastructure that's going to be needed.
Well, a report came out, identifying that Britain is the most crooked country for money laundering, and so we all know that the government's subservient to the corporations and the bankers and the money launderers of the world, and we certainly experienced that with our British fuel cell technology being stolen and absconded by Russians, and the Russians being protected by the High Courts of Justice, and us being basically discriminated against, which I actually said in the court, do you discriminate against people working in renewable energy, British renewable energy, in favor of Russian actually indicted Russian criminals. I said that because it needs to be a matter of record. That's actually true. Anyway, to what you were saying before, it reminds me of the cover of a Time magazine from years ago that said nuclear or coal. And it was like, those are your options for like clean energy, clean coal, which is doesn't exist anymore, and nuclear. And the answer that I've come up with, thinking about the same thing as you, because, you know, like, I mean, I don't like I'm not super into hierarchy. I don't really like the idea of hierarchy. I just don't like it. I would prefer everybody to kind of be their own king and queen or whatever. We should just be nice to each other, and but not have to rule or tell each other what to do. So this is why I really came up with the idea of biophilic systems and what they mean. Because essentially what it should provide people with is an ability to make the assessment for themselves. If you use these principles, and we can agree on these principles because they all come from the fact that we need to breathe. So we go from there, like, what are the undeniable steps from the fact that we collectively need to breathe to create a system that basically circles back to that and doesn't have any superfluous identities or mannerisms or behaviors or requirements for it to function. And if we can construct something simple like that, we can apply it to battery technology, to fuel cell technology, to solar, to wind, to coal, to nuclear, to all these things that we're told are the things that are the thing to invest in, green, grey, blue hydrogen, whatever the investment terms are, or the memes of the day are. And we can look at it through that lens and be armed with something that we all agree on as the basis of the decision we make about whether it's good or bad, or whether we need to try again or whatever. And so I feel like for me that the extremely challenging part of my world was to figure out, well, how can I communicate something that people don't want to hear about, which is fuel cells, without being like a vegan person that tells everybody not to eat hamburgers when that's literally in their mouth. And even though I probably agree that that should be done, but you know, without it being like that, without it being Margaret Thatcher, who never probably said a decent word in her life. But I mean, the fact is that we don't want to have we don't want to have people telling people what to do, because as long as we have people telling what to do, those people telling people what to do are in power. And power corrupts, and ultimate power corrupts ultimately. That's just kind of how it is. Like, you very rarely, apart from a few, you know, Roman emperors, ever had a very good emperor, you know? I mean, you had some wonderful emperors, but they were all knocked on the head by all of the subsequent or precedent emperors, and everybody looks at an emperor as being a bit of a dick. Because in principle, the idea is a bit you know, it's not great. So we now have this world where we're all connected and everything like that. And so if we have just some principles that we can all agree on, we can make our own assessments without being dictated to, and hopefully come up with some cohesive, self-initiated agreements. And you know, that's how I look at it.
I kind of feel like, you know, just to sort of, you know, bring this all together, I see that people will be able to adventure into your link tree, which I've shared here as well, and to be able to communicate with you directly through that as well. Come to your exhibitions, go and check out your, you know, online presence as well, which is really exciting and really interesting, just to explore, you know, what is effectively sort of almost like nature promoting VR, you know, the sort of the opportunity to really immerse ourselves in and augment our lives with the kind of questions I think that Mileece has been almost like seeding into her landscapes, right? And give us a thumbs up, give us some feedback. We'd love to know, you know, how you experienced that, what you experienced, and, you know, what your questions are. So please do sign up to Replenish Earth on YouTube and explore some of Mileece's work as well. So Mileece, thank you for joining us today. And thank you for the chat and the opportunity to explore your work. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thanks everyone, and everyone involved in this. I hope we do all the right things together, and I look forward to that.
Mwah.
Bye.